about needs for the New York Yankees, guys on the trade market who are still free agents who they could be looking at. Who did you have on your mind?
Well, as I was saying earlier, the Yankees have a lot of options for their starting rotation and as well for their bullpen. They got a lot of young guys who could step into roles. But I think one thing that they could do is go out on the free agent market. You saw what they did with Chris Carter, and they gave someone who led the National League in home runs last year a 1 year, $3.5 million deal.
An absolute steal, by the way, compared to what people were expecting for power bats coming into the offseason.
Yeah, you look at Trumbo and Encarnacion, and they're getting huge deals for their power bats. And then you got someone like Carter, who came in and got a 1 year, $3.5 million deal. And I think since the Yankees have waited this long in the offseason, they could swoop in and grab someone like Travis Wood, who has starting and relieving experience. And he could be a really valuable piece for this team, at least in 2017 on a 1 year deal, where he could start, he could relieve, he could provide that versatility that Adam Warren has or Brian Mitchell has in that rotation and bullpen, allowing the Yankees to sort of mix and match with what they want out of their pitching this season.
Let's talk about the opening day lineup, and how would you think they order them, and who's going to be where on opening day?
Well, I'm giving the opening day first base and right field jobs to Bird and Judge, as they are currently listed on Yankees.com on their depth chart. As for a starting lineup, you've got Tanaka on the mound, obviously. He's the ace of this staff. He's going to be their opening day starter. Then in terms of the lineup, the Yankees experimented in the second half of last season, flipping Gardner and Ellsbury, so that Gardner leads off and Ellsbury bats second. And I think that's something that Joe Girardi is going to continue to do heading forward in 2017. So I think you'll have Gardner in left, Ellsbury in center. Then moving into the heart of the order, I think you're going to put Gary Sanchez, Matt Holliday, and Bird in that 3-4-5 spot, creating a possibility for a lot of power to come out of those spots in the lineup. You've got the potential of, close to 70 home runs from the three of them. So I think the Yankees are going to maximize the power output there. 6, 7, 8, 9. You've got Headley, Gregorius, Castro, and Judge. And really, any way you order these guys, they're going to produce.
Yeah, in the one you sent me, you had Headley below Castro and Gregorius.
So I would say Castro batting sixth, given his successful 2016 output. He had 21 home runs and was close to the team lead in RBIs. Then I'd go Gregorius. He's a left-handed hitter. He's got the chance to use that short porch, and he would be nice back-to-back with Castro, his double-play partner. Then Headley, he's a veteran. You respect that, so you don't bat him ninth. So I would put Headley eighth at third, and then Judge with his monster power potential. The guy's got, Giancarlo Stanton power right here. I think he's going to be in that 9 spot at least to open up the year. And if he doesn't win the job outright, on an alternating basis with Aaron Hicks, so they can work interchangeably into that 9 spot.
Do you think Girardi would ever consider dropping Gardner or Ellsbury to bat ninth, just so you have that sort of speed contact bat at both the top and the bottom of the order, like Gibbons did with Carrera and Travis last year in Toronto?
I think if the opportunity presents itself to put someone like Bird or Castro or Gregorius in that 2 spot in the lineup, somewhere where Derek Jeter hit for 20 years, I think Girardi would take advantage of that and move one of those guys up into the 2 spot. And as a result, you would put Ellsbury back in the leadoff spot and Gardner move him down to the 7, 8, 9 spot in the lineup to create that, 2 ends of the lineup overhaul you saw last year in Toronto.
It's just such a classic-looking lineup. And I know advanced stats don't support it, but managers tend to, I've noticed, come back to it, where an outfielder, like a speedy outfielder, leads off, then there's sort of a Jeter-style player, middle infielder batting second, to start off, and then the power bats come in.
I've noticed that a lot too across Major League Baseball over the last several seasons. Yes.
All right.
And I think the Yankees aren't an exception to that. Yeah.
So that's really all I can think of when it comes to the Yankees in spring training. Is there anything else you wanted to mention?
I think it's going to be a great season in the American League East, and we'll see where the four major competitive teams end up come October.
That's a great segue because I want to talk about each area of a major league team and what teams in the AL East you think are strongest. Let's start with rotation. Looking at all 5 teams, which ones are the strongest, and if you can, rank them a little bit.
All right. If you're looking at starting rotations across the American League East, you got to start with the Boston Red Sox. This team had 2 Cy Young Award winners in their rotation already, in Rick Porcello, who just won the award, of course, and David Price, who won it a few years back with Tampa Bay. Then you bring in Chris Sale, who everyone says has the potential to bring another award for the Cy Young back to his mantelpiece after being snubbed each of the last several years. So given those top 3, I think you've got a great core for Boston's rotation. Then you bring in Stephen Wright, who was an All-Star last year, Drew Pomeranz, All-Star last year, and I think you've got a really solid starting 5. So I'd say that those 5 guys are my top rotation in the American League East.
Are you worried about Sale regressing in Fenway? Sorry to interrupt.
No, absolutely. I think he's moving from the pretty spacious U.S. Cellular Field in Chicago to Fenway Park, which is essentially a bandbox. There's a lot of home runs going out of there, flying over the monster, the pesky Cole. And I think Sale might take a step back in the ERA department, and that might hurt him in the Cy Young race this year. But ultimately, he's a great pitcher, and he should adjust by midseason or the start of next year.
Sort of like how David Price took a little while to adjust in Fenway as well.
Absolutely. I think you've got 2 very similar pitchers there, and the Red Sox are lucky to have the 2 of them.
All right, continue with what you were saying.
Moving on, I think really close to where the Red Sox are in terms of pitching skill, you got the Toronto Blue Jays. Sanchez, Estrada, Happ, Stroman, and Liriano are as strong a starting 5 as you'll see across baseball. Sanchez and Happ, especially, that righty-lefty duo, should bring a lot of Blue Jays games late into the game where you can see them turning it over to Grilli and Osuna right at the end of the game. As for Estrada, Stroman, Liriano, you've got guys with varying amounts of experience, but all who are capable of taking a game the distance, and I think that's really going to help Toronto this year.
What about, we talked about New York, what about Baltimore?
Baltimore, you've got the incredible power of Chris Davis, Manny Machado, Mark Trumbo, all of them. They're definitely going to lead the major leagues in home runs again this year. But their one weakness is their starting rotation. They have a lot of question marks after Chris Tillman, who is the de facto ace of the staff. You've got Kevin Gausman, Dylan Bundy, Wade Miley, Ubaldo Jimenez, who's famous for giving up that home run to Edwin Encarnacion in last year's wildcard game.
Hashtag where is Britain?
And I think the 5 of them have the potential to be an average at best starting 5 that will be offset by some of Baltimore's power. And I think the only reason why Baltimore will compete in 2017 is their bats and that core of really solid, powerful hitters.
And up to this year, I would have said because of the managerial style of Buck Showalter, he tends to bring out the best. But then you think of, in the wildcard game last year, the whole Britain thing. Could you believe, we haven't actually talked about this in person yet, could you believe that Buck Showalter did not bring in Britain in that situation?
I was a little surprised that he left Jimenez in that long, especially as he got into trouble. But I can understand his reasons for not bringing Britain in earlier enough in the game. The Orioles, by virtue of head-to-head competition, were the 5 seed against the 4 seed Blue Jays, even though they had the same record. And given that Toronto was the home team, I think Showalter saving Britain for an opportunity to close out a game if the Orioles had taken a lead was the right decision. You know, you hadn't seen a team like the Indians or Cubs using a Miller or a Chapman for multiple innings in a row, covering that span of time in a game. And I think Showalter was a little bit afraid to do that with Britain after such a successful season.
I'm curious, would you still take Buck Showalter over John Gibbons?
Given Gibbons' recent track record, I think a lot of people would say that he is currently the better manager. But I think, as you said a few minutes ago, Showalter tends to bring out the best in his players, and he has for the last 20 years or so as a manager and as a coach. So I think I would take Showalter over Gibbons heading into 2017 as my manager.
And every single one of them over John Farrell. All right, last team, Tampa Bay Rays. You can remember the names of 5 players who are... No, I'm kidding. But the Rays are a mess.
Well, I've got their depth chart up right here, so I would have answered that question easily.
You know what I mean, though.
Yeah. I think you'll see the Rays falling out of competition early in the season. They had a lot of injuries last year. They brought in an injury-prone catcher in Wilson Ramos, who's going to miss the start of the year with ACL surgery. And around the infield, around the outfield, they've got a lot of question marks. They've got a good young starting staff led by Chris Archer, who's due for a renaissance season. But I think there are ultimately too many question marks around the horn to give the Rays a fighting chance this season. Other than Longoria, Kiermaier, and maybe Matt Duffy, there's really not a lot of hope for this Tampa Bay Rays team in 2017.
Maybe Kobe Rasmus, too?
Potentially. If he can get that batting average up, I think he'll succeed down in Tampa Bay.
The only thing Tampa Bay seemed to have going for it was like the player loyalty from Longoria and guys like that, like Archer and Longoria, who just wanted to stay there as long as possible. And then they go and trade Logan Forsythe, and Evan Longoria publicly speaks out against it. So, I don't know. Tampa Bay is something.
You've got something with Longoria there, where he was there in 2008 when the Rays ran all the way to the World Series. And I think he's sticking around there not only because of his contract, but as you said, the loyalty. He wants another chance at winning a championship there. And while Tampa Bay might be, 3, 4, maybe even 5 years out from really competing for that championship, I think Longoria is going to want to stick around for the long haul.
That said, even the most patient and loyal of players tend to run out of patience at some point. We saw that with Roy Halladay, and I believe it was 2010. He was traded mid-year after finally getting fed up with the franchise not going anywhere.
Right. It appears as though someone like Halladay, he left Toronto too early and he arrived in Philadelphia too late.
Just unfortunate timing right there.
He's still a Hall of Fame pitcher either way.
I would have thought first round Hall of Famer, but now I'm seeing different analysts saying maybe not. Where do you stand on that?
I think, Halladay is going to be going in with a bunch of players from what has really been a golden era of Major League Baseball over the last 10, 15 years. But I think given all of the players that are currently on the ballot going forward, as well as those who will be on the ballot in coming years, your Mariano Rivera, David Ortiz, Derek Jeter, all of them coming onto the ballot with Hoffman, Guerrero, all of them, Bonds and Clemens even. I think Halladay will be a long shot for a first ballot induction, but he'll definitely be in within the first 4 or 5 years of his candidacy.
I think I said first round Hall of Famer because, I don't know. Did you know that Sean Tollison was on the Tampa Bay Rays?
I did not.
Mr. Sean Tollison, in 37 appearances last year, had an ERA over 7 with 7.68 in 36 innings.
That's an interesting risk for the Tampa Bay Rays to take, but we'll see where it goes in their bullpen.
All right, AL East, we're going to wrap up right about now. What's your final thoughts about it?
As I said it before, you've got 4 teams that are going to be competing for that division and for wild card spots. with only 3 up for grabs, if that.